when we're talking about growing our email list, there is a few different ways to do that. And so that's what I kind of want to talk to you about today is the different avenues that you can go down to getting people onto your email list. So the first one is content marketing. And I don't want, before I actually start talking about these, I'm going to give a big range of things to do, but a couple things. Number one, the order you choose to do these in for your business is dependent on you and what makes sense for you and what's going to work for you and maybe what you're already doing. And then the second piece is to only do one of them at a time until you've got that figured out and sorted out. And then once you're feeling comfortable with the piece of marketing that you're doing, then and only then should you be moving on to the next phase of marketing and adding in another marketing element. And so I talk about this in a couple of different podcast episodes. Chris mentioned my podcast. It's called Market Scale Grow. And I refer to this as the holistic marketing elements, I guess is the best way to put it, the holistic marketing elements, and adding one of them in at a time and just doing it in a way that makes sense. And so the first one that I always talk about is content marketing. And that's your long form content, your podcast, could be blog or video, not all three of them. You're picking one. And it does depend on who you're serving, your audience, but then also what kind of content you might be interested in consuming. For me, I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts. And so it was a very natural choice for me to pick a podcast. I know that a lot of teachers and a lot of teacher business owners prefer blogs and they go for the blog as their option. So it really just depends on where you want to show up and where you can show up consistently. That's really, really important is showing up on a regular basis. And whether that regular basis is once a month or every other week or every single week, it doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent and your audience starts to realize, okay, on the 15th of the month, every month, Jenzaia puts out a piece of content. Or in my example, my podcasts come out every single Saturday. And so every Saturday there's a new podcast episode, and just being consistent. And that doesn't mean you can't take breaks, and it doesn't mean that life can't happen. I took 3 weeks off over the Christmas holidays. I took 3 weeks off during the summer last summer. So you can take breaks, but consistently just getting into a rhythm so that your audience knows when to expect that content from you. So that's the first way that you can be marketing your business and specifically growing your email list. And there's a couple of really great ways with your content that you can grow the email list. So the first one is what I would call expert level or your signature trainings. And this is where you're really, really going in depth. You're getting really deep and you're sharing all of your expertise in a blog post or your podcast episode that really showcase you as an expert and then lead people to opting in to your lead magnet. So for example, I have a freebie that's a holistic marketing guide. And so when I do a podcast episode about holistic marketing, it's showcasing me as the expert and it's leading people to download that guide. So that content has been curated specifically for the email, or to get people on my email list. The second type of content would be your signature talks. So if you're going to be doing something like what I'm doing right now, or a podcast guesting or blog, if you're going to be not a ghost blog, but a guest blogger on someone else's. The difference there, a ghost blogger, it would be under the same person's name, the owner's name, whereas a guest blogger, it's under your name on their blog. So if you're guest blogging or you're a guest on a podcast, you're doing something like this kind of training, having a smaller chunk off of your content, of that expert level content, that's a little bit more digestible, a little bit easier to digest. And then the third one would be that consistent content pillar that's coming out every single week. And those ones are going to be a little bit more of a soft sell. So you're not necessarily trying to push people to the email list really, really hard, more just like getting the idea in the back of their head, bringing it up a little bit, but not download. And over time, that consistent content, the content pillars that you have, putting out content every single week or every single month, whatever makes sense for you and your business, people are going to learn more about you, learn more about your lead magnet, and start to trust you, and then want to get on your email list. So that is the first one. That would be your content marketing. And then the second one that I want to talk about today is community building. And so this is typically, it's going to be your social media. It might be a Facebook group, but it could just be Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn. Yeah, those are the big ones, I would say, where you're going to be showing up likely more frequently than that content. And it's a really, really great place to showcase that lead magnet. You can be doing like short form videos where you're showcasing the lead magnet itself. So like scrolling through the pages, sharing about it, or you can do short form videos that are like, this is the content of the lead magnet. If you want more, then you go get the lead magnet. That is by no means all of the content that you'd be putting into your community. Again, whether it's a Facebook community or your Instagram following, you want to be putting out other content. So it isn't just get on my email list, get on my email list, get on my email list, right? The purpose of getting people on your email list is to nurture them and to sell to them more. And so I would say like once a week, once every other week, showcasing that your lead magnet on social media is going to help remind people that it exists. And when we're thinking about social media, remember that only like 1 to 4% of people see anything you put out. And so it might feel really repetitive to post about it every single week, but the people who are like, most people aren't seeing it every single week. They'll see it like once a month, once every other month, or maybe just once and never see it again. And so we need to keep bringing it back up. And the other way that you can use that community building to grow your email list is to redirect people from your social media to that long form content, which is why I personally recommend you start with the long form content. You start your blog or podcast or video content first, and then you get into the community building so that you can be promoting your lead magnet directly on social media, but then you can also be indirectly promoting it by sending people to your blog posts that promote your lead magnet. And so those are kind of the two parts of marketing. And then the third piece that I often talk about, the third element, is email marketing. So that is emailing your list every single week or every other week or once a month. And I recommend with that you do the same time frame as your content. So if you're putting out a piece of content once a month, then you're also emailing your list once a month. If you're up to every other week for content, then you're emailing every other week. But yeah, so those are the two. Like I said, content marketing is really great for growing your email list. And then list building is the other way that's really great for growing your list organically. Before I move on to the third one that is outside of the holistic marketing elements that I talk about on a forever basis, I just want to take a little pause and say, are there any questions about content marketing or community building to grow your email list?
For long form content, the email list is separate from like a blog, right? Like long form content, you're not talking email list.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're two separate things. And so for me, I have my podcast every Saturday. And then on Mondays, I email my list about the podcast. It's like hey, there's usually a bit of a story that relates to the topic of the podcast, but the whole point of the email is come check out the podcast episode that came out on Saturday. And that's a really easy way to get the same content out there to two different groups of people, because most of the time, the people who read your emails aren't going to be the same ones who listen to your podcast or read your blog, and vice versa. Same with the people on social media, might not be consuming your emails, might not be listening to your podcast, reading your blog. And so that's why this holistic approach where you kind of hit all the three different places is going to get the most success because you're going to reach the most people, but you can use the exact same content in all of those places. So you're not recreating the wheel. You're not having to come up with 10,000 different pieces of content every week. You have your main piece of content and then everything comes from there. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And I personally like using my podcast as my main piece of content, but I've worked with people who use their Instagram captions as their main form of content. Like that's their initial piece of content. And then they'll take that as the outline for the email that they send. And they'll take the Instagram caption and turn it into a blog post. For some people, starting with that shorter form Instagram caption is like a bullet list, and then they can expand into a longer form email and a longer form blog. So it doesn't have to be your long form content that's your starting point. It just, that works well for me.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question.
Sure.
You talked about community building on social media platforms.
Yes.
Do you have one that you recommend? And do you recommend starting with just one social media, or should we like shotgun approach it? And then how often should we be posting?
Okay, so my thoughts about how many you should have is to start with one. And this is for like everything. Start with just one as you're getting started. Like for me, when I was first podcasting, it was a lot. I was outlining episodes and recording them and editing them all by myself on Friday nights, and the episode would go out on Saturdays, and it was like a scramble every single week. And then slowly I kind of like got my systems together. I figured out, okay, I need an outline. I need to record at some time. I need time to edit. And so I started I don't batch write episode outlines now. I once a week add to whatever outlines I'm really feeling pulled to. And over the course of a month, I get all of these outlines fleshed out. And then once a month I sit down and I record. But it took me time. Like I've been podcasting for 2 years, and I've probably been doing the system for like 6 months now, right? So it takes time. You need to give yourself time to figure out what works, what doesn't work, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense for you, and to give yourself the time to create that procedure. And that's for anything, whether it's TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn, Facebook. I don't really have a recommendation for which platform. You really have to think about who your audience is. If I think about teachers in general, and I'm assuming that everyone has teacher businesses where they're either targeting teachers in the classroom or they're targeting other teachers that might have businesses or are homeschooling or that kind of thing. Your demographic is probably on Instagram and Facebook. Now, if you're targeting younger, like brand new teachers who are just coming out of school, if you're targeting teenagers, like that for test prep or something, like you're working with them to work on their SAT or SAT, right? Like those people are more likely to be on TikTok. If you're targeting more professional corporate kind of people, you might think about going on to LinkedIn. So it really depends on who your target market is. And LinkedIn is getting more and more popular, especially for the crowd that like the Facebook, Instagram crowd. So the like millennials and a little bit older, I would say. But yeah, I would say most teachers right now are mostly on Instagram and in Facebook groups, not your Facebook page, Facebook groups. So there was one more question. Oh, how often should you post? Consistently. That might mean once a week. That might mean once a day. That might mean 4 times a day. It's more important that you are consistently putting out quality content than putting out all the content you possibly can if it's garbage. So quality still does trump quantity, but the balance is getting closer and closer because we have such short attention spans and people are just like scrolling. Posting just once a week, once a month on social media, especially like Instagram, is not likely going to get you the results that you're looking for, but consistency does trump, or quality trumps quantity. Yeah, so you want really good quality posts going out and not just lots of posts. Does that answer all your questions, Chris? Okay. Yeah, so playing with it and finding a happy medium. I typically post anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week on Instagram and like once or twice a week in my Facebook group. It's what works for me. My Instagram, I started very, very first in my business, and it's kind of like grown with me. My Facebook group is the most recent thing that was added, and it is definitely a work in progress. I'm still trying to figure that out. So each piece of your business that you add in, when you add the email marketing in right now, so you're creating your lead magnet right now, you're creating those welcome sequences right now. I wouldn't recommend anything else. Like right now, that should be your focus. And then maybe you're consistent-ish on Instagram, right? Like you're still doing it, but it's not where you're focusing your time and energy, because right now your time and energy is going to creating your lead magnet, creating that welcome sequence, and getting consistently emailing your list on whatever frequency you decide it works for you, whether it's once a month or once a week. If you have the bandwidth and the capacity to do it once a week, that is what I would recommend. But again, here, quality consistency trumps quantity. So one really, really good email every single month is better than 4 garbage emails every month. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions before I move on to the final way that you could be growing your email list? I mean, there's obviously more than these 3 ways, but the last one that I really want to touch on and that I think is really important, and I think a lot of us miss out on, especially in the earlier phases of our business.
Just one more question. So
Yeah.
I have about 4 people on my list, on my email list.
That's exciting.
Oh, and it's pretty exciting because it took me like 2 years to get 2 people, and recently that doubled to 4. So it's more exciting than you think. But
Yeah, no,
anyway,
it's super exciting.
Yeah. So it seems to me that that's going to be a lot of work and energy if I've only got 4 people. I mean, is it acceptable for me to just wait until that has grown more before I start emailing them consistently?
I think that that's something I totally understand what you're saying. And I think that that's something you need to decide for yourself. The biggest downside of not emailing right away is that they might forget who you are. And then when you do email out, they'll be like, who's this person? I haven't heard from them. I don't remember signing up for anything. Their name isn't familiar, whatever it might be.
Oh, yeah, I see your point. Yeah.
Right. And so, but if you're emailing on a consistent basis and your name's popping up and they start to remember who you are, then it just builds that relationship. And they talk a lot, like in the marketing space right now, we're talking a lot about micro touch points. And those are really, really small interactions with a brand. And it can be something as small as seeing your name in their inbox. They don't even need to open your email. They don't need to read it, nothing. Just seeing your name would be a micro touch point, and it's helping to build that relationship, build that trust. So the sooner you can start being consistent with it, the better. But I also do understand what you're saying. There's only 4 people. It doesn't feel worth it. And so you might choose to spend just a little bit more energy building your list and only email once a month for right now. And then once your list gets to a bit of larger, then increase the frequency to once every other week or once a week. But I would still say, like, even with just 4 people on your list, at least once a month, and then your name's still popping up in their inbox.
Okay, thanks very much.
Any other questions? Okay. So the third way that I recommend that people grow their email list, and I waited way too long to start doing this one. I think a lot of people wait too long to do this because we're nervous about getting like out there. We want to grow our email list, but then there's also the fear of putting ourselves out there. It's like this really weird double-edged sword where if you want to grow your email list, you have to get out there, but you don't want to get out there, so you're not growing your email list, right? And that is to do collaborations. And there's so many different ways that you can collaborate with people. I touched on a few of them before, but I didn't really get into why they are so valuable. Content marketing and community building, you're really using your own organic like network and building your list from scratch and building your audience from scratch. Whereas collaborations, you're borrowing someone else's audience. So you're going in and you're saying, okay, Jenzaia has this podcast and every single week, this many people listen to it. And so I'm going to steal those people who listen to it. I'm going to borrow those listeners. And then I will present myself in front of those people. And because they already trust Jenzaia is letting me on her podcast, so that's helping with my like trust. Then you are essentially it's adding to your trustability, which is huge. I don't even know if trustability is a real word. Your trustworthiness, if you will. So that's similar to what I'm doing right now, where I'm going in front of you guys and you all trust Chris. And so because you already trust Chris and he's trusting me as an expert, it just gives me a little bit extra like credit when I come to present in front of you. And borrowing someone else's audience helps you to save time and energy. And we all know that building like a Facebook or Instagram following, getting people to listen to your blog or read a blog, listen to a podcast can be really, really, really challenging, especially at first. And so by borrowing other people's audiences, it saves you some of that really hard lifting muscle. And typically when you go onto like a podcast, for example, at the end, a lot of people will let you share a freebie. So you can share that lead magnet and get it out in front of that person's audience. And now you've presented something of importance to them, because you would do your conversation, your interview first. So you've presented something important, you've showcased yourself as an expert, and you've given them some value. And then you're also saying, if you want more from me, here's where you come find me. Here's where you get that free thing. And so borrowing someone else's audience gets your name out there that much more. Podcast guesting is really, really great because you don't need to have your own platform at all. You can go onto someone else's show and you can chat with them for the half an hour, share your email list, and then all of their listener or your freebie, and then all of their listeners will hear about it. Some other really great ones are conferences and summits. So if you have a chance to participate in a conference or a summit, I highly recommend it. It's another way that you can share your expertise. Typically with conferences or summits, again, the host will give you a way to share your freebie so that you can get those email lists. A couple that are getting really popular right now are like freebie bundles or paid bundles, either one of them. But a freebie bundle is essentially like 10, 15 people get together, everyone puts a freebie in, and then if you wanted access to those freebies, you share your email list, and then everybody who contributed a freebie is given the email list file at the end. If you are hosting one of those, you need to be careful that you make sure it's very clearly worded on the website that everybody's going to be given the email addresses afterwards, just so that people who sign up know that their email address is being shared with 15 other people. But yeah, so collaborations are just such a great way because it also will help you to find your voice, which I think is something that a lot of us struggle with when we're first building our business, is trying to figure out the topics that we want to talk about and how we can present ourselves as an expert. And so getting up onto other people's stages, whether it's like a podcast stage, so it's not like a real stage, or you could do live actual events on stages as well, is just a really great way to help you find your voice and then also to grow that following in a very natural way. And people want something, right? Like they want to get something from you. They want to take value away from it. And I really, really strongly believe that the more value you put out into the world, the more value will come back to you. And so it is really important for me to do things like this because I know that I'm putting value out there, and whether it comes back, this is my personal attitude about it, is whether it comes back from the people that I'm giving it to, or from other people, or from something that is completely unrelated, that is unexpected. I know I'm putting value out there in the world, and that it will come back in some shape or form. And I think that that's really, really important in business right now, is putting that value out. So I just got a question. How do you find a person to collaborate with, and how do we go about asking them to collaborate? Great questions. So conferences and summits, often the host of the conference or the summit will post about it like in their Facebook group or on their Instagram account, or they'll send out an email to their people to say, like, I'm hosting this conference, summit, whatever you want to call it, and that they're looking for people. And then you fill out an application, and then you might be accepted or not. So that's one way. Another way for podcast guesting, if you're listening to a podcast, and I highly recommend that you listen to at least 1 or 2 episodes before you reach out. But listen to a couple episodes, find out if the podcast actually even has guests. There are some podcasts out there that just don't have guests. For whatever reason, Crime Junkies is what's coming to my mind right now. They don't really ever have any guests on there. They're never doing guest interviews. So if I was to reach out to Crime Junkies and be like, hey, I'd love to be on your podcast, they would likely look at it and be like, well, you clearly have never listened to the podcast because we never have any guests. So you want to make sure that you're listening. Now, just because a podcast has never had a guest on it doesn't mean they wouldn't, and doesn't mean you can't reach out. But I would say, like, acknowledge it. I know you don't normally have guests. Here's why here's how I could add value. And you really do want to always approach it from the aspect of, I want to add value to your audience. Here's how I could help your audience, how I can add value to the people that, to the people you're serving. Because again, everybody's in it for them. Like, what can they get from this? How is it going to benefit them? They don't really care. When I'm reaching out to people to podcast, they don't really care what the benefit is for me. They want to know that after Jenzaia has been on my show, my audience will get something good about it, or good out of it. So you can totally email podcast hosts, or start a relationship with them on social media, on Instagram. I have people sometimes that will DM me, we'll get into conversation, and then somewhere in the conversation, they'll ask if I'm looking for podcast guests. I get a lot of emails about being guests on my podcast. And so I think that those are the 2 most common ways for people to become a guest on a podcast. And then the other place that's really, really great for finding collaborations is in groups like this. So small mastermind type groups, smaller communities where you're getting to know the people a little bit better, where you're starting to connect with people, and you're starting to, like, just get to know them, get to know their business. And you can do really cool things like those freebie bundles, or you can do a freebie swap where you say, like, I serve math teachers, elementary math teachers, you serve elementary language teachers. Do a freebie swap, because the math teachers might also be looking for ELA stuff, and the ALA teachers might also be looking for math. And so you can swap freebies. I found a lot of my podcast guests and people that I've collaborated with in small mastermind groups like this, because I know that they're like-minded. I know that I can trust them. I know a little bit about them before I have them on my podcast, or before I go on their podcast. And I think that that's really important. And then if it's somebody that you're like aspiring to, you feel like it's a bigger name, like an Amy Porterfield. Maybe Amy Porterfield's a little bit too big for this, but building that relationship first in any way that you can without being a crazy stalker freak. But like reaching out again on Instagram, starting those really casual conversations and making an effort to build a relationship. I think people are much more willing to have you be an expert in their community or a guest on a podcast or do some sort of swap with you if there's a relationship there, if they recognize your name, if you've made an effort to be a real human, right? When I get a podcast like guest request that basically feels like copy paste, there's no personalization, there's no effort to have said like they listen to my podcast or that they know anything about me or my business or my audience, I typically just like garbage it. So do your research, try and do that, build those relationships and get to know the person first. Yeah, and then how you actually ask them is like how you would ask anybody any question, I would say. I know that seems like such a silly answer, but just saying like, hey, I think it'd be a really great idea if we did this. Would you be interested? Right. And you're probably going to get some no's, but you're not going to get any yeses if you don't ask, right? You'll never be on someone else's podcast or you'll never do that freebie swap if you don't ask. And you need to start the ball rolling, especially when your business is starting. You need to be the one who reaches out, right? Once you're known as an expert in your field, once people are like, oh, well, like Jenzaia is the Facebook ads expert. We know her for Facebook ads. And so people have started to reach out to me, but for a really long time, I was only getting collaboration opportunities when I was the one reaching out to other people. So reach out to other people, do that first step and just ask them, and then be ready for no's and don't take it personally. Maybe it's not the right time. Maybe there's other reasons that it's not a good fit. But yeah, just ask, and do just a little tiny bit of stalking, relationship building before, so that they recognize your name. Okay. Other question. Suggestions to prevent email from going to spam. Bought the domain, but I tested and it still goes to spam. I only have 2 followers too. So there's a ton of technical ways that you can prevent it from going to spam. I don't know any of them. DKIM is coming to mind, but they're just the DKIM or whatever it is that I'm thinking of. It's just a way to help prove that it's a real email address, and it's going to go to spam for a while. It might. The best thing you can do is just like have people tagging it as not spam, continuing to grow your email list, continuing to build trust with your email service provider. I'm just looking it up. So I use Flowdesk as well. So I'm just pulling up my Flowdesk right now so I can see, because like I said, DKIM is what's coming to mind, but you want to make sure that you have your email address verified in the back end of your email service provider, and that you are using that domain, the email, and not a Gmail or Yahoo or whatever it might be. Yeah, it's the DKIM records. So I had to go into the back end of my domain, and then there's a whole bunch of CNAME records that you add. This is getting so technical. Okay. So that's the first thing to do. I honestly don't really know exactly how to like get that to stop. I just know that the more of a real actual human you are, and that sounds so ridiculous because you're obviously a real human, the less it will happen. But there's no way to like completely prevent it. I'm sorry. I don't have a great answer for you. If anyone else has a good answer, that's something that you could reach out into Facebook groups and see if there's anyone techie that might have an idea. I know a lot of times in that first email that I get from somebody, it says, make sure you whitelist it. And if the email does go to spam, make sure you mark it as not spam, so that it's telling the email service provider that you're not spam. You can maybe sign up for your email list with as many different emails as you have, like yours, your personal one, your work one, your other, like all of the different email addresses you have. Send out that email and then go mark it as not spam from every single one. I have no idea. I'm so sorry. I'm just like spitballing ideas right now. Does Chris have a better answer?
Can I just chime in? I'm sorry.
Please save me. I feel like I'm digging a hole right now.
You've given us a lot of good information. So with the emails going to spam, like Jenzaia said, it's going to happen for a while, because just like when you get a website or when you start on Teachers Pay Teachers, the SEO doesn't kick in on your website or your Teachers Pay Teachers, and so it doesn't register for a while. That's what's going on with your email at the moment. It's still new, and so the back end codes inside of like Google or Yahoo or Outlook, they still don't know what to do with this thing. So the best thing you can do, besides continue to get people on your list, is to encourage like people to open it, like Jenzaia said, to whitelist it and mark it as not spam. If they start replying to it, those are all going to be good signals sent to the email platforms that you are not spam, that you're a real person, like she said, and that's going to help. As far as like purchasing stuff or like code or something, I don't know. I'm sure there's always stuff that's going out there, but I'm also quite positive, just like when when you get those radar things in your car to prevent police from scanning it, and then the police just go get something that blocks that. I think that's how it's going to be with the emails. You can buy something, but then they're going to fix their email platform so that that's not happening, and then you're going to have to. So there's probably something out there, and it probably works, and I don't know how long it will work, but the best thing you can do, it's also the cheapest thing, is just grow that email list and then get people to reply to it or mark it as safe.
One of the best ways that I've found and that my clients have found about like getting people to reply to emails, is offering like some sort of incentive and like doing some just like pure relationship based emails. So I've sent out emails like, I'm planning on going on a trip. Anyone have any suggestions? Like, and that was the entire email. And I got like 5 or 6 people like, oh, I love this place. Right. So sending out that email, like just like I said, purely looking for interaction, and is just like a relationship like you would send to your best friend, or like a giveaway type incentive. So either like the first 3 people who reply will get this resource, or they'll get a free Starbucks card or a TPT gift card, or like whatever you feel like you want to do. For my 100th episode of my podcast, I said anyone who replied would get a Starbucks gift card. So those are some ways. And again, you don't have to do something that's paid. Like you could do a free resource, or sometimes when the TPT sales are coming up, you'll get one of those free $10 gift cards. And so to win the $10 gift card that you have to give away, you could do it as like the first person, or I'll randomly raffle anyone who replies to this email, those kind of things. So there's some sort of incentive to reply to the email. And then, yeah, just like building up your trust, building up like, I'm a real person, I'm consistently sending emails. So yeah. Okay, those are all of the things that I have to share. I'm happy to answer any more questions though. A creepy smile.
Can I share one story?
Absolutely.
And I'll probably cut this out of the video. So Jenzaia was talking about collaborating. And I know that like when I was starting, it's tough to think of yourself as the expert, and you don't feel like an expert. So here's a story that might help you realize that you are the expert. And that is the story of the Black Pearl, not the Pirates of the Caribbean ship, but the actual black pearls that they use in jewelry. And it was like during World War I or II, they were garbage. Black pearls weren't of any value. You would just throw them away, or the oyster heart farmers or whoever they are, they would just throw them away because they weren't worth anything. And somehow there's this long story about this guy who had this failing watch factory during the war, and he sold it. And anyways, he ended up with all these black pearls, and he didn't know what to do with them. And he reached out to a friend in New York, and basically they made a necklace out of black pearls, and they put it in the front of their shop, and they sold it. They advertised it for like $1 million, and it sold. And then they just became a thing where everybody wanted black pearls, and now it's a fashion statement. And so the moral of the story is, if you want to be an expert in your field, just declare yourself an expert. So just like they just said, hey, these are black pearls and they're valuable, come buy them. You're going to be the same way with your niche. And so start to get your head around the fact that you do have value, you have things to say, and just go say it. And that's my key for like trying to collaborate, is like, I can offer value to you. Like if you're reaching out to Jenzaia to be on our podcast, I could share this. I'm an expert in this field, and then go.
Well, and to add to that, first of all, you're likely at least one step, if not two steps ahead of your audience, right? So you even if you're not like the most expert of all experts, you're still ahead of your audience. And then second of all, when I have people on my podcast, I don't think I've ever interviewed another Facebook ad strategist. Not that I'm like completely opposed to it. I just haven't. I tend to be the one sharing the Facebook ad strategy on my podcast. I have other people on who know things about Pinterest, or know things about Facebook groups, or know things about like whatever their expertise. And typically I know almost nothing about these topics. And so even if, again, you're not the most expert of all experts, you know more than I do about your topic, and that makes you the expert in that moment. So yeah. And as long as you've done a little bit of research and there's actually value that you're adding to my podcast, I typically say yes to everybody. So feel free to email me if you think that you could have something to add to Market Scale Grow. I'm happy to have people on.
All right. Well, Jenzaia, thank you so much. It was awesome.